everybody, back to another episode of Parker X. We're still doing the remote thing because we're all stuck at home. And nice shout out to our last episode where we just about completely missed everything we were talking about when it came to the coronavirus, on how bad it could possibly be. But I think we're all experiencing what it is now. And we've decided to move on and hit some different topics because that seems to be all people are talking about. So with that said, Brett, let's kick off another episode of Deep Tech.
Great, thank you. Welcome to the future again. And the latest messaging that we're hearing here is in 90 days we'll be released from lockdown. So let's put a $5 on that and see what actually happens.
Yeah, no doubt. I hope it doesn't take that long.
Yeah, and at least I'm getting through all the jobs around the home that I can. So there's some things staring at me, and the list is getting bigger and bigger.
Ironically enough, I'm saving a lot of money.
It's true. It's true.
We're not going out. All that stuff isn't happening.
So one of the interesting things that we are seeing is the death of cash. So in virtually every instance, the cash economy is falling away. And one of the huge things that'll change in this industry is people will pivot now towards cards, phones. That payment will just become the default. And hopefully the laggards, the people who were traditionally holding on to cash and coin payment, through this experience, and the longer this experience draws out, then they'll find alternative ways to cash. And part of the discussion that we'll go through today is talking exactly on this topic. So technologies that allow what's called a frictionless experience, and there'll be even greater demand for that. So I know it's a topic that's close to your heart, Lester, and you've had a lot of experience with this. What I've tried to do here is present a brief primer on the methods and functions and objectives of the different forms of frictionless parking.
Sounds good.
Great. So fundamental to frictionless parking is the amount of reduction of the handling of physical tickets. I think we can say that also cash handling. So removing both of those things from the parking experience removes crucial elements of friction. So in some instances, in shopping centres such as that have extended free periods, they've really been drivers in this area. Some sites have embraced something called Ticketless, which is a concept that uses LPR and phone-based identifiers to migrate people through the parking experience. So I was instrumental in the rollout of the first wide-scale barrierless entry and ticketless shopping car parking design back almost a decade ago now. And since then, in Australia at least, for the major shopping centres that offer sort of a free period, then this has become a default. And we'll see that. And I think, Lester, you've been a part of that. We've seen that in many locations in the US. And that's following on from the use of mobile phones, the broader adoption of that, and also the wider acceptance of license plate recognition generally.
You know, I have some thoughts around that too. I think that there's really like three simple tenets that make something frictionless or make it adoptable or something you adapt to. It needs to save you time and effort. That's the number one piece it has to. So for the actual end user, it needs to save time. Maybe even not effort, but just time. Really just the amount of time that you can save by doing it. If it also saves you money, or it saves the operator or whoever's operating the car park money, that's kind of the second little checkbox. Not the most important one, but certainly another checkbox. And then if it also saves effort or time on the operator or whoever's operating the car parks end, I mean, those three things right there need to happen, or maybe like 2.5 of them or 2 of them need to happen, I think.
You've got it.
They'll likely spend more money if they can get 2 of those. So maybe it doesn't have to save the facility money, but if they can get the first 2. But I tend to focus less on whether there's a gate or not, whether there's a cell phone involved or any of it, and more on the fact, did it save me time, and did it save the operations time and reduce effort?
I agree. And today we'll attempt to walk through the various options that are provided to achieve a frictionless type experience. So
Sure.
at the curb, on the street, and off the street as well. And then at
Okay.
drop-off locations as well. So to start with, I thought we'd discuss the lenses that we want to adopt in order to evaluate which technology or combination of technologies to actually go ahead and install. So there's some factors involved in that, and that's the maturity and availability of those technologies from the supplier. And that may be a central determining technical factor into choosing one supplier over another. That's how critical these frictionless type capabilities are. So I thought it was also important to have a look at what are some of the possible questions which sort of act as guiding principles to set our objectives. So I've got 6 of them here. The first one was, can we provide a single identifier for all parkers, or are we happy for large proportions of our parkers to use separate methods? So one use one type and another use another type. Is that complicated? Is that what we want? What are we willing to sacrifice there? Or are we really seeking a single method for everyone? The second one is, are we seeking 100% to collect all the revenue that's possible, or are we willing to trade off some of that to make the parking experience super convenient? The third one is, are infrequent users likely to get it when they roll up, or are they likely to fumble the ball, mess it up, and cause a problem operationally for us?
Do you have a screen you can share on this?
Yeah, I'll share the screen in a second. I'll share the screen that the model that we'll look through. So for those who are on listening via the podcast, flick across. We'll make this a part of the image of the podcast, so you can have a look at what we're talking about here. Or we'll provide a link to the image as well. The fourth one is the method of frictionless being leveraged to generate loyalty? Is that our goal? Are we looking for better engagement with our parkers? So traditional forms often are anonymous. So is the objective actually to create some loyalty with the people who are parking at our facilities and parking on our streets? And the fifth one is, once the system is set up, like you said, Lester, how much operational support is this system going to need? Do we need to commit more resources than otherwise in order to keep this system operational in terms of manpower and also technical and ongoing costs? Is providing a frictionless experience great for the customer, but operationally more of a hassle?
Sure.
So for the purpose of the brief introduction, I've scored a sample of the available technologies in 4 categories, and I'll bring that up for us now, Lester. So it's on screen for those who are watching, and again, we'll put a link into the podcast so you can have a look at this matrix. But I've classed the available technologies in a few different ways. I've classed them against their maturity. How long have they been in the market? Whether they're new to the market or whether they're still on the cusp of being introduced or introduced in some areas of the market, but not fully adopted generally for what we would call parking. And then I've scored them against 4 different categories. So I'm looking at invasiveness. So how much does the user need to action for this to work? So is it onerous in any way for the customer to actually do something in order for this frictionless experience to happen for them? Because that means that there's some friction either at the start or on an ongoing basis there for the customer to be exposed to.
There's a hurdle they have to get over if they want to engage in using this sort of technology.
Correct. So
you know what's interesting is I almost think we need to add to this at some point, and maybe you're doing it already, the 2D barcodes or pass cards.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that's the same as like an HID card?
Yeah, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
This is not a perfect science.
That's sure. But that's the kind of standard, normal thing that people are used to. It's like, you've been given an access card to the facility. Here's how you get in.
That's right.
And it's still widely used today. About 95% of the transactions for monthly cards are doing that at this point.
I would say. And if you have a look at the category of revenue capture, which is another category we want to frame up the discussion around. With revenue capture, those types of experiences, those pass cards, 2D barcodes, they capture a really high rate of revenue.
Yep.
Because fundamentally, not only do they have a pass card, but there's often a fallback as well. It's not the only means to do something in those deployments. Level of ongoing support, obviously we spoke about that. How much manpower, how much power will you need to continue to use and make this solution work? And then the ease of use, which is the fundamental tenet of Frictionless, that it's somewhat unconscious, that it's easy to understand, because parking is not the means to the end. It's not the end game. It's the purpose of the parking experience is to get you through the experience so you can go and do something else. So the more unconscious it is, the easier it is, then I rate that more highly.
I would agree. I mean, that may be rated right next to revenue capture.
Absolutely.
If we can get somebody to go to your facility, whether it's the mall or whether it's in parking, all of a sudden becomes something that they don't even think about before they leave the house.
100%.
That they just kind of go, not really, like I'm not thinking about when I go to the grocery store whether or not I can get a shopping cart. Kind of in that sense.
Yeah, I'll let those objectives sink in a little, because there's tension between these four categories when you think about them as well. So can we offer a single identifier? Are we seeking to 100% collect all the revenue? Or are we looking to make it easy as the primary goal? Are we looking to make it intuitive as the primary goal?
Yeah, I'd almost take revenue capture for me is almost like it's just a dollar sign number, right? So you could almost mix cost to actually deploy it and revenue capture almost in similar categories, because if it costs kind of the support required and the revenue capture, you can almost put it on one side of a chart and then have your ease of use over here. And it's like if you're going to take a slider, like where do you want it to be? Because the further you get towards ease of use, the chances are the further you're getting away from total revenue capture and additional support required.
I would agree. Then the other piece to that triangle is maybe you make it easier, you increase your revenue.
Now that would be the really nice bonus.
It is. So there are trade-offs in different contexts. Universities, different shopping centers, different airports, they'll all have slightly different configurations there for sure. So I've pulled together 7 different technologies that are either highly mature, really starting to break into the market, and ones that are hyped that we know will come at some future point in the next 5 years, I would say. Some are already active at the moment in other contexts in the transport industry. So we'll start with the first one, Lester. This is 2D barcodes and pass cards. You've already gone through that a little. It's really a default thing. So this requires some registration, some administration to produce and distribute and handle. So where it comes to the support required, it scores quite highly because there's actually quite a bit of administration in the background. It's a physical product, so someone needs to possess it, distribute it. It scores more highly, I think, on revenue capture because of the fundamental factor that generally there's a redundancy. Both 2D barcodes and pass cards are generally not standalone. There's something else supporting that in the case of failure. So I would score the revenue capture there highly. Ease of use, well, that's arguable. Yeah, it's easy. It's intuitive. You wind the window down, present something to something, and it works. The other one that's long, go ahead, Lester.
Oh yeah, most people don't mess that up. They usually, all right, they can do that. I think from their 2D barcode on their phone, that can be problematic. Not all the barcode readers are created equally.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual pass card, that's just kind of it's a pretty simple one.
Yeah.
Most of the reservation platforms today are sending barcodes.
Barcodes, credit card, same.
Yeah.
Alternative methods there. The long-range reader or the AVI reader, again, that's something that you would not necessarily distribute to a wide customer base. It's more for, I guess, for a select group of users. staff, permit holders. It's traditionally vehicle mounted, which makes it obviously high on the evasive aspect.
With the sticker cards or tags have become really popular, and they're cheap.
Mm.
They're almost the same price as an HID card, the regular
Passive.
pass system. So, yep. So it's interesting that that technology continues to come down in price, because there was a point where AVI tags were $25-$30 a piece.
Those passive cards are great. One of the well-known issues with those is users self-applying them to their vehicles can mess that up. If they don't put them in some vehicles in the right space on the windshield, they don't work so well. So there is a high tactile nature to it, and that's just fundamental to it. But a great solution. Again, high on the revenue. Generally, there's that fail over if you don't get that technology quite right. The next one is LPR cameras. These have been around for 15, almost 20 years now, in use in parking in some locations, predominantly at airports, but then now more widespread. And there was a wave of introducing cameras as part of a default deployment, probably about 5 years ago, starting as early as 10 years ago, to add this as one of the preferential features. Cost is quite high for this if you're using it as a substitute. It does add a significant additional cost to a lane. And there's also ongoing specialist support required to make these systems work optimally, which is unavoidable.
And it's video analytics at this point. It does not self-heal as much as we would like it to. It just doesn't quite do it completely on its own.
Absolutely. And we're seeing it in two different means. One is where it supports a ticket, and another where it is the single and sole source of identification. People like staff users and in some shopping centres. So where there is a failover, it's a great tool. It adds the ability to track people who are using the primary medium, the ticket, in the wrong way. And it's a security function, a revenue protection function. And then when it's used in the frictionless environment, it's offering a really simplified method to transit people through the parking experience. One of the aspects to it in the frictionless environment is you need to know your number plate. In a ticketless environment, you would need to know your number plate. So it's its ease of use is great in some aspects. It can be completely unconscious, but then in the ticketless deployment, if it's being the sole identifier, you either need to enter your phone into your license plate into some sort of application for it to be tracked, or you're actually plugging your license plate into a system, or having at the exit an interaction with the column to pay for your parking experience if your payment's required.
It's funny how culturally that's different, whether someone knows their license plate or not. Like you talk to some, I remember being in the room with, distribution partners from around the world, and it's just such a mix of. Most of them couldn't believe that in the U.S. we did, and even state by state, we didn't know what our license plate was. California specifically, when you sell your car, the license plate goes with it. East Coast, Virginia, West Virginia, places like that, you keep your plate. So it is, even within the United States, it's different from state to state. So,
this is a fundamental, critical element to license plates. They're very geographically based. License plates change. The types of license plates change also.
Sure.
So that means that the technology, if you're basing your fundamental technology around LPR cameras, then deregulation of plates, changing plate graphics can all mess with the system. And so,
especially too, United States, like most people know, if you're in a cross section where you're in 3 or 4 different states, where you have people commuting from all those different areas to come in, and every state has a different, regulation around their plates, it does make it a little more challenging.
Absolutely. And there's there's some aspects of whether capture it's fairly well adopted and accepted now, but in some jurisdictions, is capturing someone's license plate and storing it, and is storing their license plate with some of their other details. Is that a privacy issue? Is storing that for a long period of time, is that a privacy issue? In some jurisdictions, in some cultures, that may be the case.
You know what's interesting? So for the first time ever in this last 12 to 18 months, people have started asking us for our privacy policy related to license plates. So what are we doing with that data? How are we retaining it? What's it being used for? Is it being shared? And we've had to start submitting that sort of information to customers. I've done it twice in the last 3 weeks. I've had to submit that. And thankfully, we have a European-based product, and, they have that stuff in place already to meet the European requirements for that sort of thing. So it was nice to be able to hand it over. And
Yeah. So arguably, there's a policy aspect to that.
Sure.
Often, if you're using those technologies, you're not volunteering that information. It's being captured from you without your acceptance, I guess. And so we'll see greater regulation potentially in that space if it's warranted. Some of the more new to market technologies are the phone-based technologies, and there's, I guess, 2 flavors that are out there at the moment. That's the Bluetooth related apps that use the phone's Bluetooth to trigger an interaction with the parking infrastructure, and then the other one is the NFC communication platform, which is doing effectively the same thing.
It seems like the only place I'm really seeing, like Bluetooth, obviously there's a lot of hype around it. HID came up with a great product for their kind of that little twist app that you do. But it seems like NFC, it has more traction, at least. Look, there's a lot of people doing it Bluetooth well. It is heavy on hardware that you need, especially when you're doing it from a vehicle. But when it comes to, it does work well. It is easy to use.
It's one of those things. Is what will be the default, Betamax or VHS? And potentially there's a drag race there for it. But inarguably, there's something around the phone and the way the phone itself registers to the parking infrastructure, and whether that's an app, whether that app is a Bluetooth app, whether it's NFC, or whether it's some sort of 5G wireless experience. That is the preference.
So I'd say that if you look to the transit authorities, like the big ones, New York and places like that, you really see this move towards NFC, the NFC ticketing. And I think it's interesting, you've got apps, Bluetooth apps and NFC apps. The NFC stuff is not going app-based. It's using the native functionalities, which I guess you could call it an app, but it is using the native functionality. But there's a big, big difference between asking someone to download an app versus use something that's already native within their phone to be able to achieve something. And I think that's where, in my opinion, that the NFC will win out long term, because there's less effort on the end user's part to be able to utilize that, or just gain that technology, because they already have it natively today, right now. Everyone with a cell phone, circa like iPhone 6 Plus, and even back further with the Android, they've got NFC antennas built into their phone today.
They do, and most facilities now have some form of NFC with their contactless readers embedded in it. Now, there's a couple of elements to that. Obviously, they're much more higher on the invasiveness scale, or slightly more higher on the invasiveness scale than the LPR camera-based in-and-out solution. Arguably, there's an interaction there with your phone in some way. Whether you need to then register, and the benefit of pushing people to register or provide a registration has the loyalty dividend that you're seeking, so that maybe generates an additional level of stickiness with your location, which might be sought after. If there's a parking fee that's due, again, you need to interact somehow with the system. So there's an element of ease of use, registration potentially that mixes in those combinations. Again, these technologies are still shaking themselves out. So I've tried to gloss through some of the capabilities. Support required for both of those types of technologies. Yeah, there's some infrastructure in the lane. Some of it already exists. Some of it will need to be supported long term. If it's an application, it'll need ongoing upgrading and administration. If it's collecting data, there'll be new regulations, new payment platforms it'll need to link into. So I think it's probably equally as high as an ALPR camera or an LPR camera. And then one of the issues with the NFC is the token changes that are dictated by the different providers. So there are some known issues and known controls about it, but what it does, it just means that make sure you're getting the support you required. And that's part of how you engage with this technology. Revenue capture, it's interesting. They certainly haven't crested a wave where these technologies are now for every user. Arguably, it'll get to that point, and it may get to that point faster after this experience we're all going through now. But I wouldn't suggest it's a standalone technology. There's probably some aspect of a fallback in this. So for a proportion of your population, this will be a great experience. But for the rest of your population, you'll have something that they're more familiar with. Maybe it's a ticketed solution. Are you seeing that, Lester, in your deployment? It's not a standalone identifier on its own?
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things that I like about this list of the 7 different technologies you have is if you really want to create an ease of use experience, then it's not up to you really how your clients come and interact with your product. So having whatever number of these things you see fit as different methodologies for people to utilize your system, that's really the ease of use that you're going to end up with for the kind of cross section of the clients and customers that are coming to your facility. So just like using an NFC app for a monthly card or for an access card or for a reservation, it's just never going to be the only way that you're going to allow people to utilize reservations at your facility. And just like the other ways won't be the only ways you allow people to come and go, we're always going to have 3 or 4 technologies.
I think that makes sense. And
the older ones will drop out over time, but it's going to be a constant, dropping out the olds, adding in at the top at some point.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yet we still have a ticket.
Some of these solutions will be substituted by the other ones. Some you could layer into your existing facility some of these technologies right now as well, and take away some of potentially the downsides that you see in some of the identification means that you have. You touched on something there, and that's about how things get paid for. I'm seeing a lot now with go directly using these new identification means, go directly to something that will enable you to pay for your parking session through your phone. And we've seen that a lot on street. It's fairly well trodden path where you can pay for prepay, post-pay, pay in your session. If you're looking to overstay, you can do that through your mobile phone.
I think that's where I like NFC the best, because the majority of people, at least in the United States, they're using NFC or Apple Wallet or Google Wallet for something, even if it's not necessarily holding it up to make a payment. But when they engage with whether it's another app or a website online, and if I see the option for Apple Pay, I click it every time because my credit card information is already there. It validates me through the face scan, and I'm good. I don't have to do anything else. It just happens for me. And I think that's what I like about NFC is that you can have a reservation or a ticket or a monthly card, and then on the back of that NFC pass, or in support of, Apple Pay can be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, all of your payments are happening seamlessly through the phone. I didn't have to type in any numbers. I didn't have to download an app. Like, that's all native functionality. And for me, that's native functionality in your phone. People don't, I don't know. I have like a whole junk drawer of apps. Like I've used like once or twice in my phone.
No one wants 50 different apps. No one wants to have.
Well, you don't.
No one wants to have 10 parking apps. No one wants to have 2 parking apps. Really.
No one wants to have any, really.
So if it can be avoided, obviously let's see what we can do, and that obviously overlays to the whole frictionless aspect here. So again, some people have a native affinity to adopting technology quickly. I think we're seeing 30% of transactions in some cases using the phone-based payment method, the NFC payment method now. In the US 2 years ago, that was maybe 10%, 0.
That wasn't even that, like 3.
Yeah. So you can see how once these things get experience, they start to explode and they get preferred pretty quickly.
Things are going to happen pretty quickly when it comes to that. I mean, I think there was like a weird scare in the U.S. where no one wanted to do contactless because they thought everyone was going to walk up to them and wave an antenna over their pocket and they were going to get all their information, which doesn't happen. I think that you're going to see contactless start up, and as soon as it's already starting, and that'll push everything else.
This unfortunate virus will absolutely push people away from cash. We started at the top of the show with that, and contactless is only going to blossom from here.
I agree.
I'm interested, as we close out, Lester, there's a couple of new ones that are much hyped. I think these are interesting just for us to have a bit of fun and speculate about. So facial recognition, you said you use that on your phone currently to validate your purchases. Using that at the infrastructure, using a vehicle scanning function, which would be, again, completely interesting and an adjunct or a different experience to license plate recognition. It's still too early to know if the accuracy is there for this to be practical or useful at all. And also using your face as a recognition obviously screams of an issue in terms of privacy policy, retention of that.
I don't know. We will give up privacy at the drop of a hat the moment it earns us a little bit of a discount or makes things a little bit easier for us. And we want to cry about it after the fact, but I think we're genuinely give that up all the time. I'm surprised that facial scanning, some sort of technology, is not more prevalent. I mean, as well as it works on my phone, it's interesting that I wonder if they could make that work in parking just as easy. Because my phone's not that expensive compared to if you had to pay for an $1,100 reader to go in the lane. It's interesting. Could you really pull up and just look left and then get in?
Well, have a look.
I don't know.
That's how I log into my laptop. So I look at it and it opens up. So imagine in the same way, I'm sure there's a technology out there that could do that. Again, whether people will enjoy that, I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I have to look into that a little bit and see if we can play around with that. I know people have talked about doing it, but it doesn't seem to have caught a lot of traction. I think vehicle scanning is an evolution of the LPR camera. I'm hopeful that the LPR camera, or the ANPR camera, LPR cameras that are in place today, that somehow they can be repurposed into doing a combination of the camera, of the license plate, plus the actual vehicle. What I want to see them do is just identify the vehicle. I don't care if we know the license plate or not. Hopefully they do. But I just want to be able to say that was the same vehicle that entered, that exited, and transmit some sort of identifier to the parking system and have it be irrespective of what the plate actually said or what it actually captured for the plate number. Yeah,
the holy grail has been not only get the license plate, but get the make and the model and the color. And then maybe we can do something with that. And it's really, the accuracy historically has not been there to do that.
I'm actually more interested in being able to break down the license plate for what state and area and zip code they came from. I mean, that's what retailers want.
True.
Right? When a vehicle rolls in, where did that vehicle come from? Or if I do, I run an ad today in a certain market to a certain demographic, how can I track the number of people that actually showed up? And I could do that by plate potentially, but there comes that privacy piece again.
So it's still hyped because I think the accuracy is probably not where it is. It needs to be something that's it can produce a lot of junk data, which is not what you want. The facial recognition has the intrusiveness. I think that we'll probably get to a point where people may want to use that as a secondary form of identification. Who knows?
The public geofence thing you have next year is that to my mind is like that's really where, if you could ever get there, but then again you'd have to kind of throw your revenue capture to the wind a little bit until there was something that could identify every vehicle with payment tied to it.
So we see that with Uber. Some airports, forecourts are geofenced at the moment, and there's arrangements there to have chargebacks for the use based on the geofencing. Again, when that potentially becomes a publicly adopted and accepted way to track their vehicle, and potentially tied to some form of vehicle to infrastructure communication. So Lester's driving into a CBD. He goes through a tolling area, a geofence tolling area, and he's accepting that. Then he parks on the street, and his vehicle is known to be in that facility. It's in that strip. He parks there for his duration. He leaves, and that all happens automatically.
Automagically. That's a good word. I think the hardest thing for that, and the thing that's going to detract from the ability to do that, like that could work really well at an airport. That'll work well at a city or some sort of public-owned facility where they have the teeth built in of, I'm going to take your driver's license away from you if you don't pay, or I'm going to add it to your vehicle registration.
Absolutely.
Or even further than that, I'm going to attach your paycheck and take the money from you, physically reach into your bank account or your paycheck and just take my money back. It's going to be really challenging while private facilities don't have those teeth. So I see a couple different options there. If we can, and they've done it in some really interesting consultants have been able to pull together some public-private partnerships where they're able to, have the enforcement revenue, yet the revenue for the location gets collected locally, and they're able to keep that. It's going to take that or a change in regulation for that, I think, to work beyond the public.
Absolutely. For it to crest, that it really needs to come with every vehicle, and you need, in an off-street scenario, you would need some form of recognition that vehicle is registered. And
even every vehicle would, if there wasn't payment tied to it, then
that's right. So an account inside, the vehicle itself has an account functions linked to something. When you log in and use that vehicle, you're paying for whatever that vehicle uses. So it's not quite there yet, but it's something that's much hyped about for sure.
I think that's the hope and dream around Bluetooth, why it was so popular initially, because there was this assumption that the car was going to need to communicate with some way with the parking facility, which I still believe needs to happen. Mm-hmm. But now that almost every new cars are not coming with guidance built into them anymore. People are using Apple CarPlay and whatever the Google equivalent is, I forget what it's called. But they're using those sort of things that are coming native in vehicles now, instead of all of this technology built into the head unit, or the kind of the center dashboard of the vehicle, which changes the game in my opinion. Because now you're assured an internet connection.
Absolutely.
You now definitely have an app store that's fully capable, that can download anything. So I think that's an area I intend to explore more, is that.
So it's funny you said that. So different geographical areas go at different paces. Australia was a super fast adopter of license plate cameras as a means. The US is certainly much more pivoted towards things to do with phones right now. Map experiences, NFC, Bluetooth, whatever. The vehicle to infrastructure communication, countries like South Korea that are almost meshed up to the max when it comes to communication infrastructure, they've led the way in that. 4G inside the vehicle was something that was pretty much predominant 5 years ago. So they're way ahead of some other jurisdictions when it comes to having that technology be ubiquitous and available. That's a quick tour around it, around the range of technologies that have historically or currently being deployed, and some of the ones that are interesting to note going into the future. So if we circle back to our objectives, there's a range of technologies there that are available, a range to adopt now, a range to look to adopt in the future, and the context of who uses what and how far your populations use some of these technologies and not others. Again, have a look at the support that's required for the technology. Might sound great, might be easy to use, but how well known is how much you need to support it, and ask those questions. Ask how much revenue you're going to lose by adopting this. Understand the ease of use and maybe that trade-off that we touched on between, if I lose some revenue here, what am I gaining in terms of loyalty or ease of use for my parker base? What did you think, Lester? A good tour?
I liked it. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's good. Lot to explore there.
Great. We'll go through. I guess we'll go through a little bit more of these in more even greater detail. But I think this is a really good topic and a really poignant topic, given what will happen at the end of this experience and how people will absolutely start to preference a non-cash experience, a non-ticketed experience, a non-physical interaction.
I think it's time to get everybody back to work. I know that's going to take a little while, but man,
We've
this
got to
sucks.
do it.
I guess it's more time for stuff like this, but man, challenging.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Parker X podcast. We sincerely appreciate it and hope you are enjoying our content. Please remember to rate, review, comment, subscribe, and share. And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The following has been a production of Parker X.